You know, they say blood is thicker than water, but I learned the hard way that sometimes love needs to be proven through actions, not just words. My story isn't an easy one, but I survived the greatest heartbreak a mother can face, losing her child's trust, and somehow found my way back to his heart. It all started 3 years ago when I was diagnosed with early onset dementia at just 62. Can you imagine? One day you're planning your retirement, thinking about all the places you'll travel with your husband, and the next, a doctor is telling you that your mind, the very thing that makes you who you are, is going to slowly slip away. My son Michael took it harder than I did, if that's even possible. He was 35, married to a wonderful woman named Sarah, and they had just found out they were expecting their first child. Instead of celebrating this new chapter, he was faced with the reality that his mother might not remember her own grandchild. The first few months after my diagnosis were a blur of doctor's appointments, medication adjustments, and difficult conversations. Michael would visit every day, sometimes twice a day, bringing me groceries, helping with paperwork, making sure I was taking my pills. But I could see the fear in his eyes every time he looked at me, like he was already mourning the mother he was going to lose. Then came the day that changed everything. I was having what the doctors called a bad day. One of those days where the fog rolls in thick and nothing seems familiar. Michael had brought his wife Sarah over to help me sort through some old photos, thinking it might help with my memory exercises. I was looking at a picture of Michael's college graduation, and suddenly I couldn't remember who he was. This tall, dark-haired man sitting next to me, holding my hand so gently, he felt like a stranger. The panic that washed over me was overwhelming. I started crying, asking him to leave, saying I didn't know why he was in my house. Sarah tried to calm me down, explaining that Michael was my son, showing me more photos. But in that moment, none of it made sense. Michael's face crumpled like a paper bag. I saw him mouth the words, "I can't do this," to Sarah before he walked out. That was the last time I saw him for 8 months. Sarah would call me every few days to check in, always making excuses for why Michael couldn't visit. "He's working late," she'd say, or "He's coming down with something and doesn't want to get you sick." But I knew. Even through the haze of my condition, I knew that my son was avoiding me because seeing me like that was too painful for him to bear. The loneliness was crushing. Here I was, facing the scariest thing that had ever happened to me, and the person I needed most, my only child, couldn't stand to be around me. I'd sit by the window for hours, hoping to see his car pull into the driveway, hoping he'd change his mind. My condition progressed faster than the doctors had predicted. Within 6 months, I was struggling with basic tasks, like cooking and managing my finances. Sarah convinced me to look into assisted living facilities, and after touring several places, we found Sunset Manor. It was a beautiful facility with a specialized memory care unit, but more importantly, the staff there treated residents like family, not just patients. The day I moved into Sunset Manor was one of the hardest days of my life. Sarah helped me pack my belongings, and I kept hoping Michael would show up to say goodbye, to tell me everything would be okay. But he didn't. Sarah hugged me at the door and promised she'd visit soon, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. She was torn between loyalty to her husband and compassion for me. The first few weeks at Sunset Manor were difficult. I was angry at my disease, angry at the situation, but mostly angry at Michael for abandoning me when I needed him most. The nurses were patient with me, especially a young woman named Jessica who worked the day shift. She had this way of talking to me that made me feel human again, not just patient with a condition. Jessica would sit with me during meals when I was having trouble eating, and she'd listen to my stories about Michael when he was little. I'd tell her about the time he tried to bake me a birthday cake when he was 8 and accidentally used salt instead of sugar, or how he used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms until he was 12 years old. "He sounds like a wonderful son," Jessica would say. "I'm sure he's just struggling with seeing you here. Then why doesn't he visit?" I'd ask her, the same question I'd been asking myself every day. Jessica would just smile sadly and say, "Sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who have the hardest time watching us suffer." As the months passed, my condition continued to deteriorate. Some days were better than others, but the bad days were becoming more frequent. I started having trouble recognizing staff members I'd known for months, and sometimes I'd forget where I was entirely. But through it all, I held on to one clear, persistent thought. I wanted to see my son. I wanted to tell him that I understood why he stayed away, that I didn't blame him, and that I loved him regardless. The problem was, I didn't know how to reach him. Sarah had stopped visiting as frequently, and when she did come, she'd avoid talking about Michael. One particular afternoon, I was having a really bad day. I couldn't remember how to use the phone to call Sarah. I couldn't remember what I'd eaten for lunch, and I couldn't even remember my own last name. I was sitting in the common room, feeling completely lost, when Jessica approached me. "Mrs. Thompson," she said gently, "would you like to take a walk outside? The gardens are beautiful today." Even in my confused state, I noticed something different about how she said my name. There was a warmth there, a familiarity that went beyond professional caring. We walked slowly through the gardens, and Jessica pointed out different flowers, helping me remember their names. "The roses are my favorite," I told her, though I wasn't sure if I was remembering correctly. "Mine too," she said, smiling. "My grandmother used to grow roses just like these." As we sat on a bench overlooking the garden, Jessica asked me something that caught me off guard. "Mrs. Thompson, do you know who owns this building?" I looked at her confused. "I don't understand. Isn't it owned by the company that runs the facility?" Jessica shook her head gently. "No, Mrs. Thompson. This entire building, all 23 floors, was purchased by your son Michael 2 years ago. He bought it specifically to ensure you'd have the best possible care." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "That's impossible. Michael hasn't visited me in months. He hasn't visited you in your room," Jessica said carefully. "But he's here every day. He owns the building, Mrs. Thompson. He converted the entire top floor into an apartment where he lives. He monitors your care, speaks with your doctors, and makes sure you have everything you need." The world seemed to spin around me. "But why? Why doesn't he see me?" Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "Because he's terrified, Mrs. Thompson. He's terrified that you won't remember him, and he's terrified that you will. He watches you from the security cameras in his office. He knows your schedule, your good days and bad days, your favorite meals. He's been taking care of you all along, just from a distance." I sat there in stunned silence, trying to understand how I could have been so wrong about everything. "How do you know all this?" I asked. "Because I'm not just a nurse here, Mrs. Thompson. Michael hired me specifically to be your caregiver. I'm actually a private duty nurse with specialized training in dementia care. He interviewed dozens of candidates before choosing me." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All those months I'd spent feeling abandoned, thinking my son had given up on me, and he'd been there all along, making sure I was safe and cared for. "I need to see him," I said, standing up shakily. Jessica nodded. "He's been waiting for you to ask." We took the elevator to the top floor, and Jessica led me down a hallway I'd never seen before. The apartment was beautiful, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, comfortable furniture, and family photos everywhere. Photos of me, of Michael as a child, of Sarah, and ultrasound images of their baby. Michael was sitting at a desk, looking at multiple computer screens that showed different areas of the facility. When he heard us come in, he turned around, and I saw my son for the first time in 8 months. He looked older, more tired, but his eyes were the same, full of love and pain and fear. We stared at each other for a long moment, neither of us knowing what to say. "Mom," he whispered finally, and that one word broke something open in both of us. I walked over to him, and despite everything, the disease, the confusion, the months of separation, I knew exactly who he was. "My sweet boy," I said, reaching out to touch his face. You've been taking care of me all along." He started crying then, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry I couldn't face you. I was supposed to be strong and I couldn't handle watching you disappear." I pulled him into my arms, this grown man who was still my little boy, and held him while he cried. "You were being strong," I told him. "You were being strong in the only way you knew how." We talked for hours that day. Michael told me about the sleepless nights he'd spent researching treatments, about the money he'd spent converting the building, about the guilt he felt every single day for not being able to visit me in person. "I bought this place because I couldn't bear the thought of you being somewhere I couldn't protect you," he explained. "I know it sounds crazy, but I needed to know that every person taking care of you was someone I'd personally chosen and trusted." "It doesn't sound crazy," I assured him. "It sounds like love." He told me about Sarah's pregnancy, about how they'd decided to name the baby Elizabeth after me, and about how he'd been so afraid that I wouldn't be able to be a grandmother to this child. "I will be," I promised him. "I might not remember everything, but I will love that baby with everything I have." From that day forward, Michael visited me every day. Some days, I remembered who he was clearly, and we'd have wonderful conversations about his childhood, his work, his hopes for the future. Other days, I'd be confused and frightened, but he'd stay anyway, holding my hand and telling me stories until I felt calm again. Sarah started visiting again too, and we'd spend hours talking about the baby and looking at tiny clothes and toys. Michael had converted one of the rooms in his apartment into a nursery, and sometimes I'd sit in there with them, helping Sarah organize baby things and sharing stories about what Michael was like as a baby. The day Elizabeth was born was one of the clearest days I'd had in months. Michael called me from the hospital, and I could hear the joy and wonder in his voice as he described his daughter. "She has your eyes, Mom," he said. "She's perfect." When he brought her to meet me for the first time, I was terrified that I wouldn't remember her, that my disease would rob me of this precious moment. But as soon as Michael placed her in my arms, I felt a flood of recognition and love that was stronger than any confusion or fear. "Hello, Elizabeth," I whispered to her. "I'm your grandmother and I love you so much." She looked up at me with those bright, curious eyes, and I knew that no matter what happened to my mind, this love would remain. Love doesn't live in memory. It lives in the heart, and my heart was full to bursting. Michael started bringing Elizabeth to visit me every day. Sometimes I'd remember her from the previous visit, and sometimes each encounter felt new and miraculous. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was there, that Michael was there, and that we were a family again. As Elizabeth grew from a tiny baby into a toddler, I watched Michael transform into the father I'd always known he'd be. He was patient, loving, and protective, just like he'd been with me all along, even when I couldn't see it. There were still difficult days. Days when I couldn't remember anyone's name. Days when I was frightened and confused. Days when the disease seemed to be winning. But Michael never left again. He'd hold my hand through the bad moments and celebrate with me during the good ones. One afternoon, when Elizabeth was about 18 months old, she was playing in my room while Michael worked on his laptop nearby. She tottered over to me and climbed onto my lap, and I started singing her a lullaby that I'd sung to Michael when he was little. "Rockabye baby on the treetop," I sang softly, and Elizabeth nestled against me, her thumb in her mouth. Michael looked up from his computer and smiled. "You sang that to me every night until I was 5, he said. "I did," I asked, not remembering. "Every single night. You'd sit on the edge of my bed and sing until I fell asleep." I looked down at Elizabeth, who was now drowsy in my arms. "Would you like me to sing it to you, sweetheart?" She nodded, and I continued the lullaby. As I sang, I realized that some things transcend memory. The love between a mother and child, the comfort of a familiar song, the safety of being held, these things live deeper than conscious thought. When I finished the song, Elizabeth had fallen asleep in my arms. Michael came over and sat beside us on the couch, and for a moment we were just a family, 3 generations connected by love. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For showing me that love isn't about remembering perfectly. It's about being present, even when everything else is uncertain." I looked at my son, this man who had moved heaven and earth to take care of me, who had found a way to love me through the most difficult circumstances imaginable, and I felt a deep sense of peace. "I may not remember everything," I told him, "but I will always remember that I am loved and that I love you." As I'm telling you this story now, Elizabeth is 3 years old and she calls me Grandma Lizzie. Sometimes I remember our previous visits and sometimes I don't, but she loves me just the same. Michael has learned to find joy in each moment we have together, rather than mourning the moments we've lost. He still lives in the apartment above the facility, still monitors my care, still makes sure I have everything I need. But now he also sits with me during meals, takes me for walks in the garden, and reads me stories on quiet afternoons. The disease hasn't gone away. It never will. There are still days when I'm confused and frightened, days when I don't recognize the people I love most. But I've learned that love doesn't require perfect memory. It requires presence, patience, and the willingness to start over each day. Michael has taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love is not giving up, even when everything seems hopeless. He could have walked away after that first difficult visit. He could have convinced himself that it was too hard, that I wouldn't understand, that distance was kinder than presence. Instead, he found a way to love me that honored both his limitations and mine. He couldn't sit beside my bed every day, but he could make sure I was in the best possible place. He couldn't cure my disease, but he could surround me with people who would treat me with dignity and compassion. And when I was ready, when I needed him most, he was there. He had been there all along, just in a different way than I'd expected. I think about other families dealing with similar situations, and I want them to know that there's no right way to love someone through a disease like this. Michael's way might not work for everyone, but it worked for us because it came from a place of genuine care and commitment. The nurses here at Sunset Manor have become like family to me. Jessica in particular has been a bridge between Michael and me, helping us navigate the complicated emotions that come with this disease. She's shown me that professional care can be deeply personal, and that healing happens in relationships, not just in medical treatments. Sarah visits often with Elizabeth, and I love watching them together. Sarah has become the daughter I never had, and she's raising Elizabeth to see beyond my illness to the person I still am underneath it all. Elizabeth doesn't see a sick grandmother. She sees someone who loves her, who sings to her, who lights up when she walks into the room. There are moments of perfect clarity when I remember everything. Michael's first steps, his graduation from college, the day he married Sarah, the phone call when he told me about Elizabeth's birth. In those moments, I feel like my old self again, and I try to soak up every detail to hold on to for the darker days. But I've also learned to find meaning in the unclear moments. Sometimes I'll look at Michael and not remember his name, but I'll feel this overwhelming sense of love and protection toward him. Sometimes I'll hold Elizabeth and not remember that she's my granddaughter, but I'll feel this incredible joy at being near her. The heart remembers what the mind forgets, and love doesn't require perfect recall to be real and powerful. Michael has started keeping a journal of our visits, writing down the things I say and do, the moments when I seem most like myself. He's creating a record not just for his own memory, but for Elizabeth, so she'll know who her grandmother was beyond the disease. "I want her to know that you were funny," he told me recently. "That you had this incredible laugh that could fill a room. That you were brave and strong and that you loved fiercely." "I want her to know that too," I agreed, though I wasn't sure I'd remember the conversation the next day. One of the most beautiful things about this journey has been watching Michael grow into his role as both a son and a father. The experience of caring for me has made him more patient, more present, more appreciative of the time we have with the people we love. He's also become an advocate for other families dealing with dementia. He speaks at support groups about the importance of finding creative ways to show love and care. about the fact that there's no shame in needing help, and about the possibility of finding joy even in the midst of loss. My mother taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, he told one group. It's love acting in spite of fear. I don't know how much longer I'll be able to tell my story clearly. The disease progresses differently for everyone, and I can feel the fog rolling in more frequently now. But I'm not afraid anymore. I'm surrounded by people who love me, who will continue to love me even when I can't remember their names. Michael has promised me that when the time comes when I can no longer recognize him, he'll still be there. He'll still hold my hand, still tell me stories, still make sure I'm comfortable and cared for. And Elizabeth will grow up knowing that her grandmother was loved deeply, even when she couldn't remember that love. The building that Michael bought for me has become more than just a place where I live. It's become a symbol of the lengths we'll go to for the people we love. Other families have moved their loved ones here because they've heard about the level of care and attention that Michael has created. Jessica tells me that Michael has started a foundation to help other families afford specialized dementia care. He's using his resources not just to help me, but to help others who are walking this difficult path. He's turning his pain into purpose, she explained to me on one of my clearer days. I think that's what we all have to do, isn't it? Take the hardest experiences of our lives and find ways to use them to help others, to create meaning from suffering, to build bridges of understanding and compassion. Looking back on this journey, I realized that the 8 months when Michael couldn't visit me weren't wasted time. They were necessary time. Time for him to grieve, to figure out how to love me in a new way, to build something sustainable that would serve not just me, but other families facing similar challenges. Sometimes love looks like being present every day. Sometimes it looks like stepping away to build something better. Sometimes it looks like buying a building to ensure your mother gets the best care possible. Sometimes it looks like singing lullabies to a grandchild who may not remember you sang them. The important thing is that it's love, in whatever form it takes. As I finish telling you this story, Elizabeth is playing with blocks on the floor of my room while Michael works on his laptop nearby. In a few minutes, Sarah will arrive with dinner and we'll sit together like a family, sharing stories and laughter and the simple joy of being together. Tomorrow I might not remember today clearly, but I'll remember the feeling of being loved, of being safe, of being exactly where I'm supposed to be. And that's enough. That's more than enough. My son didn't abandon me when I was diagnosed with dementia. He found a way to love me that worked for both of us. And in doing so, he taught me that love is not about perfection. It's about persistence, creativity, and the willingness to start fresh each day. The nurse who told me who owned the building didn't just give me information. She gave me the key to understanding that I had never been alone, that I had always been cherished, and that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that happen quietly, behind the scenes, in the everyday choices we make to care for one another. That's my story. Not an easy one, but one that taught me that love finds a way, even when everything else seems lost. And in the end, that's all that really matters.